And now we'll begin looking at modern art from 1945 to 1979. And some of the key movements during this time are the New York School, which really is kind of a convenient way just to say the abstract expressionists, color-filled painters, post-painterly abstraction, a handful of movements that were going on at the time in the city of New York. And then have pop art, minimal art, photorealism, conceptual art, land art, neo-expressionism, neo-dada, and feminism. Some of the big key movements during this time. Some of the other things that start to happen is you get these movements that start to react against stuff that was going on right before it or kind of along at the same time. And really, once we get past some of the color-filled and abstract expressionism with the neo-expressionist and neo-dada and pop art, and that all really starts to come about at the same time. So again, we have all of these different movements that are overlapping each other, like we had kind of starting with the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists, and then all the other stuff that we looked at that was in Europe. So, for fun, I always like to have Mark Tansey, although his painting is from 1984, but hear me out on this one. And this is the triumph of the New York School. So as you remember, I mentioned before that Paris was the art capital of the world. Anyone that wanted a career in art, Paris was the place to be. Then we have World War II, sorry about that, World War II, and that's when there's the mass exodus of artists. And where the majority of them end up? New York. So essentially, New York takes over as the art capital of the world. And in some way, as far as American art is still concerned, New York is kind of the, if you make it to New York, then, there's kind of a, still a bit of a glamorous thing about getting to New York. Whether or not you really need to be New York to have a successful career, that's a big argument. So at any rate, so Mark Tansey's photo, there on the left side are all the European artists. So they're kind of front and center. The guy with the big furry coat is Pablo Picasso. Next to him is Henri Matisse. And if you're really good with all of your artists and who they are and all that, you could sit there and kind of go down the long list of famous European artists. And one thing to point out is they are all in World War I style military outfits. And the other side on the right are the American-born artists. And standing there, waiting to sign the papers there. And Mark Tansey did actually base this photo on, I think, 2 or 3 different treaty signing photos. But they're waiting to sign for the Americans is art critic Clement Greenberg. And Clement Greenberg was responsible for paving the way for American-born artists. So while there were already these, big-name European artists, the big deal with the New York School is these are American-born artists that start to get the notoriety and the recognition that the European artists did. Also, another Mark Tansey. So, the messiah of American art is Jackson Pollock. Some of you are probably familiar with his name. And his action painting. So this is the abstract expressionism with the action paintings, where you can trace and see the movement of the artist. So a lot of time people look at Jackson Pollock paintings and they sit there and think, oh, I could do that. My child could do that. My dog could do that. You know, it's all this. I don't know if it'd be insulting Jackson Pollock, or, you know, are you elevating your child beyond your artistic level? So what's really going on with Jackson Pollock is, while it looks all haphazard and crazy and just chaotic, you know, actuality, he had a lot of control over this. You know, think about, you know, if I use the paint straight out of the can, and that was kind of one of the unconventional things, he just used the paint out of the can. You know, what if I thin my paint down a little bit? What if I use a big 4-inch brush? What if I use a turkey baster? What if I just dip a dowel rod, you know, just like a little just round piece of wood, and I just put that in there and drip the paint? So he actually had a lot of control. And the other sort of unconventional thing that he did was he would lay the canvas down on the floor. Whereas before, you typically, you know, take the canvas, stretch it on a frame, put it up on an easel, or, you know, something to hold the canvas up there right in front of you. But really, you only have one point of view. With Jackson Pollock laying it on the floor, he could, you know, walk around all 4 sides, and he talked about how he could really put himself into the painting. So crazy and haphazard, but he actually had a lot of control over what you see. And, you know, now from a picture plane point of view, it's like there is no depth anymore. Everything's just right there in your face, just right there on the surface. So that's one of the other big turning points in the art world with it. And sort of his rival is Willem de Kooning. And his women painting, and often is referred to as this, you know, shocking and brutal way that he would portray women. But yet at the same time, there is the idea that the female is kind of the end-all be-all of Western ideology of beauty. So essentially, this classic ancient old idea just made sort of new. You know, de Kooning was just about the only one who used recognizable imagery in his paintings with the women. And so he's just, you know, doing what has been done all throughout Western art. He's just doing it of the style at the time. And kind of to change things up a little, he was often known to use like magazine or newspaper ads to get his images from, as opposed to having an actual model. So in a way, it's kind of paying tribute to classic Western ideas, but at the same time, sort of cheapening these ideas. In the color-filled painting, had Mark Rothko. I think we talked briefly about Mark Rothko before in the Rothko Chapel. But as I talked about, his work is very slow. You have to invest this time with it. And when you invest the time, you can see the shapes he has painted there. They have a soft feathery edge. It's kind of the artistic term, this, feathery, soft edge. It's not like a real hard line like we saw with the de Kooning and the Pollock. So when you sort of invest that time, and he always talked about his work being spiritual, sort of, viewing it had to be sort of this meditative, spiritual type of event that one, would have with his paintings. And you would start to get sort of this crazy illusion thing where these different panels would almost seem like they were, fluttering and floating off the surface of the canvas, or, dropping below the surface of the canvas. So you start getting this sort of weird illusions that start to happen with his paintings here. And so that was, just kind of this crazy optical thing. One of the other things about Mark Rothko is for the unfortunate side, or the unfortunate story of Mark Rothko. Mark Rothko in his time made a very good living at painting. He very good career, but essentially there were these three men. Basically, one was like a banker, one was a gallery owner, and another was kind of a well-known collector. And so these three guys, basically, they would buy, Mark Rothko's paintings at wholesale price. We'll just say, like $100 a painting. So they're paying, $100 for each painting for Mark Rothko, and they kind of trade this painting around each other. They had, another little group of people involved. They'd kind of sell and create this sort of artificial demand for Mark Rothko paintings. And then after, 2 or 3 years, they would turn around and sell it and make like $500. So $100 would turn into like $500. I'm just making up numbers. Don't sort of quote me on that for 1956 prices. But that's basically what they're doing. They created this artificial market for Mark Rothko's, and selling his paintings for 4 or 5 times the price that they paid for it. And so eventually Mark Rothko decided to commit suicide. He felt trapped and stuck, and there was no way out. Long story short, the three men went down and cleaned out Mark Rothko's studio, and they did things a little backwards. The judge said if you go along with the civil suit, you can avoid the criminal trial. So basically they determined, how many, as Mark Rothko was your employee and his job was to supply you with an inventory of paintings, how many paintings, each year would he supply you with? So, I always go with like 15 paintings. And so the judge is like, all right, you get these 15 paintings. You have to return the rest of them to the Mark Rothko family. Basically, should you fail to comply with this ruling, the three of you will be brought up on charges of federal grand larceny. That's the amount of money, the amount of paintings they took from Mark Rothko is an insane amount. So it was unfortunate of his death, but at the same time, it was kind of a win for artists in kind of the beginning of the cleaning up of the gallery system. So the next we have Robert Rauschenberg's Erased de Kooning drawing. It's Robert Rauschenberg, kind of a brand new kid on the scene, kind of just huddling along, not getting that much recognition. No one really took his work serious. Um, and he was doing these drawings on his own where he would do the drawings and erase them. As he talked about, it was this way to bring drawings back into the all white, to make a drawing and then erase it. But he said the problem was, he's just erasing his own drawing, and there's nothing special about that in a way. So that it needed to be something special, something sort of important. So at the time he made this, Willem de Kooning was, one of the top artist in New York. And so he goes to de Kooning and asks, about a drawing. And then he said, he talks about his very uncomfortable moment. Finally, de Kooning gives him a drawing. And then he spends like this a month erasing this drawing. And so one of the other kind of interesting stories is, the scandal that he defaced property. He damaged and destroyed this piece of art and took something out of art history. Whereas Robert Rauschenberg, he was talking about, well, it's this sort of poetic act. It's this artistic act. Erasing my own drawing is not that special. Erasing someone else's drawing, that's when it becomes special. So that's how, Robert Rauschenberg got his sort of entrance into the art world. And so when he was not erasing de Kooning's, he was working on combined paintings, sometimes referred to as assemblages, or if you got to be snotty about it, the assemblage. So this painting, The Bed, was his actual bed that he had in his studio. So he basically started creating early forms of hybrid art, where it's kind of part painting, part sculpture. So even though it hung on the wall, it's still the pillow and the sheet, the quilt there. It all kind of hung and sort of dangled loose. So it had this very sculptural feel to it. And then Jasper Johns with Target and with Four Faces. He starts to use these easy recognized images. And the two of them they often say they're responsible for bringing images back into the art world, where the abstract expressionists and color-filled painters and post-painterly abstraction painters, they took all the imagery, recognizable imagery, out of the art world. Johns and Robert Rauschenberg are given credit for starting to bring things back, and they are also sort of given credit for sort of the precursor of pop art. So if there's any big Simpsons fans out there, and there's the episode where Homer Simpson becomes a overnight art sensation, and there's always reference to Johns coming and stealing someone's painting. But I think there's like two brief things where this guy snatches something off I think one is like snatching it off the wall in the gallery, and at the end Marge is sitting there painting something, and this guy comes, snatches Marge's painting off the easel. That's a reference to Jasper Johns, because they talked about how he stole people's ideas and stole people's images. But at the same time, as Pablo Picasso made the comment that a good artist will borrow an image, a great artist will steal an image. So there you go. And so Francis Bacon, around the same time, figurative painting, bringing figures back into painting. So his figure with meat. And again, it's a slightly precursor to pop art, kind of mixing these random type images that Bacon was known for. At the same time, highly abstracted image, uh, very I don't know, very kind of odd, strange images that he has. Another thing that he does from time to time is he actually starts, using perspective. So not only is there this figure, but there's this perspective. So we have these artists that start to bring things back that the New York school took out. Then we also have, pop art, Andy Warhol, and the Andy Warhol effect, as it's sometimes referred to. Andy Warhol is one of those artists that kind of transcends things. To this day, he still has this huge, powerful influence on the art world and the ideas. Um, and so his first big breakout show at the Castelli Gallery, Brillo Box, you walk in. Again, this is always a good, fun class discussion. Is what do you have here? What do you see? If you walked into a gallery, would you expect to see this? If not in a gallery, where would you expect to see this? And the popular answer is in the back of a grocery store or something like that, or in a warehouse. And that was Andy Warhol's the whole idea. He picked up that we are consumers. We like our goods. We like popular products, pop culture, mass production. That's who we are. So art should become a mass-produced commodity. So in a way, he picks up where Marcel Duchamp left off. Marcel Duchamp left off with his ready-made, but that was just a one-off piece. This case, Andy Warhol amps up the idea of art being a commodity, and he goes into mass production. In fact, his studio was often referred to as the factory, just because the massive amount of paintings that he did. There could be a good argument: are they paintings or are they silk screens? Or are they a printmaking technique? Because he did use silk screens in his painting process. So you go into Louis Castelli galleries, you see this, and you start wondering, can I really afford an Andy Warhol? I've heard he's kind of up and coming. I want to have a piece, but can I really afford this piece? Well, hey, you're in luck, because Andy Warhol wanted it sold as individual boxes. You wouldn't have to go and buy the entire installation. You could just buy one or two boxes. And the other sort of big kick to the Castelli pocketbook was the price of these. He didn't want them priced any higher than as if you were to go to Walmart, Target, wherever, and buy a case of these Brillo pads. And in case you're wondering, Brillo pads are they're basically like a cleaning sponge with the dish soap inside of it. So that's what. So these would have 24 of the cleaning pads inside. So these are the things you'd have in the back that you would carry up front, open up to put on the shelves. And then Roy Lichtenstein, although he did paint these by hand, but very manufactured looking. So he was sort of mimicking comic book art. And then conceptual, Joseph Kosuth's 1 and 3 chairs. Which of these is the best representation of chair? The chair itself, the photograph of the chair, or a definition of the chair? So conceptual art becomes, the idea is more important. So the big argument here would be, well, the definition is the best representation of chair. If you're to make a physical manifestation of a chair, you probably have to compromise your idea, your original idea along the way. Therefore, it becomes flawed. I know, it's kind of crazy. Conceptual art's kind of you either kind of love it or you hate it. It's just kind of a crazy thing. But, then again, 60s become crazy. And then there's The Happenings with Alan Capro, where he stages these one-time events. So his big deal is art and life are sort of one and the same. Art and life should be one and the same. There should be no difference between art and life. So much like if your friends all go out on a Friday night or whatever, and you were at home with sinuses or just, whatever the case may be, you missed that night. So if you were not able to go down to the courtyard, you missed it. You missed out on this event. So in case you're wondering, he basically built this little scaffolding. You'd climb up the scaffolding, stand up on this little platform, and just get the sort of bird's eye view, or some people refer to it as a God's eye view, because you're high up looking down at the people here. And land art, spiral jetty. Art should be something bigger. Art should transcend. Art should be this huge experience. Get out of the museum. Get out of the gallery. These are these cold, sterile environments. Art has become tainted and is just, art needs to be something bigger and better. So Robert Smithson with his land art, Spiral Jetty, up in the Salt Lake in Utah, where he built this piece. Unfortunately, at the time when he had this piece made, which he basically just hired a construction company to push this dirt, from the shore off into the spiral jetty there. He secured a long-term lease from a farmer. Now the Dia Foundation took it over. And so he did not know at the time that the lake was at an all-time low. So two unfortunate things happened. He died not too long afterwards in a helicopter crash. Photographing this, and then the drought comes to an end, lake rises, the piece is gone. However, this is a more recent photograph of the spiral jetty. It has resurfaced. So now it's completely crusted over in salt. And so one of the reasons that he chose the Salt Lake, second deadest body in the world, body of water in the world, and the only thing that live in there is brine shrimp. So trying to find a current picture of it, I wanted to find a picture where the shrimp are sort of in their mating season. And so these little bitty shrimp congregate on one side of the lake, and it's actually a really weird thing to see. If you've ever flown over the lake, it's like half of the lake is this kind of blood red. So before it was like this cold black spiral coming out in the red. Now today it's this gleaming white. And his wife, Nancy Holt, sun tunnels, where they line up with the summer and winter solstice. So if you stand there in the middle and look down at sunrise or sunset on one of these days, it lines up perfectly in the middle. And it's about, the ever-changing landscape. To view the landscape, get out in the landscape. Go see the actual landscape. Don't just stand in a gallery and stare at Monet painting, 30 haystacks That's boring. Go out and see the actual haystacks. Go there and see them in person. That's where sort of the magic happens. At the same time, these big, massive concrete tunnels, you're looking down. The holes that you see drilled in them, they line up with constellation, as they're up above. So it's sort of this other outworld, outer off Earth experience that walking through the sun tunnels. This whole experience and the idea that you're walking amongst the stars. So there's like all these levels of experience that Nancy Holt's trying to create. Then photorealism, Dan Eddy's New Shoes for H. Not really trying to paint something that looks like a photograph, but if you've ever seen student work from a photograph, where the photograph is the original source, a lot of times there's just a certain feel to them. There's a certain way cameras capture an image, and when you work from a photograph, oftentimes it's very easy to pick out images from a photograph. They just have a certain feel to them. And so that's basically what photorealism is trying to capture. Then feminist art, rise of the female. So Judy Chicago's Dinner Party, triangular shaped table on the floor, triangular shaped tiles. So 13 place settings on each side, and each place setting basically is like a medical illustration image of the female reproductive system. And the dinner party is for like the 39 most influential women throughout history that Judy Chicago feels for her that are important. So basically, giving recognition to women, and jumping to the Guerrilla Girls, which you can go and check out today. So this is one of their more recent ones. Every now and then their stuff will pop up. They get their name for two ways. They're sort of guerrilla tiles style tactic for getting their message out, where if they knew there was some type of big event, they would show up with posters or signs, or they would try to plaster with posters and stickers and all that, with their sort of message. And they'd show up wearing gorilla masks. Sometimes that might be all that they're wearing. So, trying to get attention to them, to what they're doing. And so, but I mean, they have a good reason for doing that. When I first started taking art history back in the 90s, not a whole lot of women artists were really discussed. There were a few. There's a whole lot more now these days that are starting to be included, and it's basically women trying to fight for their equality in the equality in the art world. So it's well deserved. So I won't lie. So you can check out GuerrillaGirls.com if you're interested. And then getting to minimal art. So minimal art is kind of a reaction against all of this stuff. So oftentimes in the classroom, a good discussion question is, what does this piece do for you? Does it do anything for you? Do you hate it? Do you like it? What don't you like about it? Why do you like it? I go with kind of my normal questions. And so minimal art is sucking everything out of art. So where you have with Warhol, art is a mass-produced object. Art is, just like I said, a mass-produced object. Minimal art comes along. No, art is just an object. That's all it is. It's just an object, nothing more. So it's very cold and sterile. So artists like Donald Judd, to make matters worse, didn't make his own pieces. He had them fabricated, and he even went out of his way. It's not unheard of for an artist to use a company to create certain pieces for him. There's places out there, SculptCAD. They have like this big shop of 3D printers and stuff like that. Kind of like Makerspace, but on a much grander scale. And there's other places if you want to cast stuff in bronze or, use their tools and things like that. That's out there. But Judd didn't use those. He went to commercial fabricators to have his pieces done. So it's like further removing himself from the pieces. I mean, he did design the piece. He did choose all the material and things like that. But as far as the actual making of the piece, he did not do. So it's like removing him, making it even less personal. And then finally, Carl Andre. Uh, Carl Andre just basically would like go down to Home Depot or wherever and say, well, what's on the shelf? And buy it right off the shelf. So while Judd at least, had these things made, Andre would just go buy whatever's available. It wasn't too unheard of for him to make some modifications of his piece. So during this time, everything starts to fall apart. They feel that the art world had come to an end, that we reached a point to where no more art can be made, that art is dead. That was the thing. Art is dead. It's plus 70s in the U.S. was kind of a tough time to begin with. The big recession, all kinds of horrible things going on. And to make matters worse, Carl Andre, sort of the darling of the art world, may or may not have murdered his wife.